I stared at my phone screen for a solid 5 minutes, sitting on my bed in the dim light of my desk lamp, trying to figure out if Sabrina was messing with me, reading and rereading those words until they started to lose meaning, the letters blurring together as I analyzed every possible interpretation, wondering if there was some hidden code I was supposed to crack, some secret language that everyone else seemed fluent in except me, some universal signal I'd somehow missed in the manual of human interaction that apparently everyone received except the oblivious idiots like me. My chemistry lab partner for 2 months, the girl who laughed at all my terrible science puns even when they were genuinely awful, the one who made even the most boring titration experiments feel like the highlight of my week, who somehow made safety goggles look cute, had just sent me the most confusing message of my life, and I had absolutely no idea what to do with it. No framework for understanding what terrified of biceps could possibly mean in any logical universe. I screenshot it immediately and sent it to my best friend, my hands actually shaking a little as I typed out my message, my thumb hovering over the send button for a few seconds before I committed, the 3 question marks feeling inadequate to express my complete bewilderment and the low-key panic that was starting to build in my chest. What does this mean? I watched the typing indicator appear almost instantly. Those 3 little dots that felt like they held all the answers to the universe, or at least the answer to whether I was about to make a complete fool of myself. Bro, she wants you to show up with your arms out. This is not complicated. I could practically hear the exasperation in his text, could imagine him shaking his head at my obliviousness, probably laughing at how dense I was being about something he considered crystal clear. But what if it's a joke? What if I show up in some sleeveless costume and she laughs at me? The fear was real, visceral, sitting heavy in my stomach, because humiliation at a Halloween party felt like the kind of thing that could haunt you for years. The kind of story people would bring up at reunions decades later. The remember when that guy thought his crush was into him and showed up looking ridiculous story that would never die. Then you laugh too. But what if she doesn't? He made it sound so simple, like taking a chance was just something you did without your stomach tying itself into elaborate knots, without running through every worst-case scenario until you'd convinced yourself that staying home was the only rational option. I wanted to believe him, wanted to have that kind of confidence, that easy assurance that things would work out, but this was Sabrina we were talking about. Sabrina with her infectious smile, and the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating on balancing equations, the way she bit her bottom lip when she was thinking hard about a problem. The same girl I'd been convinced had friend-zoned me since September, since the very first day of class when she'd sat down next to me, and I'd immediately developed what could only be described as a tragic crush, the one who occupied approximately 90% of my thoughts, despite all evidence suggesting I should move on and save myself the inevitable heartbreak. The girl who asked me to help carry her textbooks, but never anything else. Never offered any other sign that she saw me as more than just the reliable guy who sat next to her in class and could explain molarity without making it sound boring. The guy who was useful, but not interesting. Who complimented my gym progress once, making my entire week with a casual, "You're looking strong lately," that I'd replayed in my mind approximately 800 times, but then talked about other guys right after, mentioning someone from her English class or her friend's brother, always reminding me that I was just one of many guys in her orbit, nothing special, nothing worth pursuing. The next morning, Halloween, I stood in my room like an idiot, pushing through every shirt I owned with increasing desperation, hangers scraping against the rod in a rhythm that matched my growing panic, the metallic sound echoing in my small room. Nothing seemed right. Everything felt wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate, like I was taking a test in a language I'd never studied, too casual, like I hadn't put in any effort, like her text didn't matter, like I was blowing off what might be the most important signal anyone had ever sent me, too try hard, like I was desperate and obvious and pathetic, like I'd misunderstood the assignment completely and was about to embarrass myself on a legendary scale, too obvious, screaming, "I'm trying to impress you," in neon letters visible from space, leaving no room for plausible deniability if this whole thing went sideways. Not obvious enough, missing the point entirely, making her think I hadn't understood or didn't care, that I'd somehow ignored her message or worse, rejected it. I tried on a pirate costume with rolled-up sleeves, something I'd worn to a party last year and felt decent in, the kind of safe choice that had worked before, turned to check myself in the mirror from multiple angles, analyzed every detail with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb, looking for any flaw that might give people a reason to laugh, looked in the mirror and saw someone trying too hard to look casual, the forced nonchalance somehow more obvious than just committing to the bit, took it off, tossed it on my bed where it joined the growing pile of rejected options, The mountain of bad decisions and missed opportunities. Tried a gladiator outfit my roommate had from last year, some costume shop special with plastic armor and a lot of exposed skin, the kind of thing that looked cool on the mannequin but questionable on actual humans. Way too much, way too aggressive, like I was trying to prove something instead of just responding to a playful text, like I was compensating for something or trying to show off in a way that would definitely backfire. Finally found a Captain America costume at the mall after wandering through 3 different stores, comparing options with a seriousness that the teenage employee definitely noticed and probably found amusing. Probably made me a story she'd tell her friends later about the weird guy obsessing over Halloween costumes. The sleeveless version that showed enough arm without looking like I was trying to be a bodybuilder, without looking like I'd misunderstood the assignment entirely. The Goldilocks of costume choices that felt just right, even though I'd probably change my mind 17 more times before the party. "You're overthinking this," my friend said when I sent him a picture, standing in the mall bathroom like some kind of fashion disaster case study, fluorescent lights making everything look worse than it probably was. "I'm going to look like an idiot," I typed back, already second-guessing everything, wondering if I should just go back to the pirate costume or maybe not go at all. "You already look like an idiot. Might as well commit." His brutal honesty was exactly what I needed and exactly what I didn't want to hear. The truth that cut through all my anxiety, but didn't make it any easier to actually do the thing. By 7 p.m., I'd almost talked myself out of going 3 times, standing by my door with my keys in hand, putting them down, picking them up again, running through every possible scenario in my head, like some kind of choose-your-own-adventure book, where every path led to humiliation. But I kept thinking about her text, about the way she'd phrased it, about the deliberate absurdity of claiming to be terrified of biceps, which wasn't a real thing, which had to mean something, about the way she'd smiled at me during our last lab, that genuine smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners when I'd made some stupid joke about molecules being clingy, like she actually enjoyed my company and wasn't just tolerating the weird guy who sat next to her, about the possibility that my friend was right, that I was being given a chance, and the only thing standing between me and something amazing was my own fear, my own inability to take a risk that might actually pay off for once. The party was already loud when I walked in, music pounding through the walls, the bass vibrating in my chest, people in various states of costume creativity crowding every available space, a sea of zombies and superheroes and things I couldn't quite identify. I spent the first hour pretending to care about people's costumes while searching every room, nodding appreciatively at someone's elaborate zombie makeup that probably took hours to apply, complimenting a really impressive Demogorgon that must have cost a fortune, all while my eyes scanned constantly, looking for red hair or a Black Widow costume or just Sabrina's face, the only face that mattered in this crowd of strangers and acquaintances. No Sabrina anywhere, not in the living room where people were dancing, or the kitchen where someone had set up an elaborate drink station, or the backyard where a group was standing around a fire pit, or anywhere I looked, and each empty room made my stomach sink a little lower. Maybe she hadn't come, and my heart sank with each empty room, each group of people that didn't include her. Maybe the text was her way of making sure I'd look stupid at this party, some elaborate prank I'd fallen for completely, and I was the punchline standing here in a Captain America costume, looking for someone who was probably at home laughing about the whole thing. Then I heard the scream, cutting through the music and conversation like a siren, so distinct and dramatic that it couldn't be anything accidental. Not a real scream, but the most dramatic, over-the-top fake scream I'd ever heard, the kind of scream that belongs in a silent movie, performed by someone who wanted everyone to notice. I turned around, and there was Sabrina, dressed as Black Widow, in a costume that was simultaneously amazing and completely distracting, form-fitting and detailed and absolutely perfect, clutching her chest and stumbling backward like she'd been shot, her eyes wide with mock terror that was so exaggerated it had to be intentional, had to be part of something. "Oh my God, someone save me!" she gasped, pointing at me with a shaking finger, her voice loud enough that people nearby turned to look, confused and curious. "The biceps! They're so terrifying." Everyone was staring now, a circle of confused faces trying to figure out what was happening, if this was some bit they'd missed, or an inside joke they weren't part of, wondering if they should laugh or be concerned. Her friends looked confused, whispering to each other, probably wondering if Sabrina had lost her mind, or if this was some new party game they didn't know about. My face was red, burning with embarrassment, and something else, something that felt like excitement, like the thrill of being part of something unexpected. But she was grinning, this huge, infectious grin that made my embarrassment evaporate, and suddenly, I understood the game. understood what she was doing, what we were doing, the beautiful absurdity of it all. Sorry, I said, walking over with exaggerated caution, playing along because what else was I going to do? Because this was clearly what she wanted, and I'd be an idiot to waste it. Didn't mean to scare you with my absolutely average arms. She peeked through her fingers like a kid watching a horror movie, committed to the bit in a way that made me want to commit even harder. Average? These things are weapons of mass destruction. She reached out like she was going to touch my arm, her hand trembling theatrically, then yanked her hand back at the last second like she'd touched something hot, like my arm was electrically charged. I'm being so brave right now. Years of therapy to deal with this phobia. Should I get you a paper bag to breathe into? I asked, fully committed now, loving every second of this absurdity, feeling lighter than I had in months. That would be great, actually, but you'll have to carry it, with your terrifying arms. We kept this ridiculous act going for 2 hours, performing for anyone who would watch and plenty of people who tried not to, creating our own little world of inside jokes and manufactured drama. Every time I reached for something, a drink or a chip or literally anything, she'd gasp dramatically, clutching her chest or grabbing onto her friends for support, making it impossible for me to do anything without triggering another episode of her supposed phobia. Every time someone asked what was happening, genuinely concerned or just curious about the weird show we were putting on, she'd explain with a completely straight face that she had a severe bicep phobia, and I was helping her with exposure therapy, that this was a very serious condition, and she appreciated everyone's support during this difficult time, delivering each explanation with the solemnity of someone discussing a real medical crisis. I'd flex unnecessarily, making a show of it, doing bicep curls with a plastic cup, asking people if they wanted tickets to the gun show, committing to being ridiculous because she made it feel safe to be ridiculous. She'd pretend to faint, draping herself across the nearest furniture or person, making everyone part of our performance whether they wanted to be or not. People thought we'd completely lost it, and maybe we had, but it felt amazing. Felt like the most fun I'd had in years. Around 11, after we'd exhausted every possible variation of the joke, after we'd made probably 50 people deeply confused about what they'd witnessed, we ended up outside on the back porch, the cool October air a relief after the stuffiness of the party, the noise muffled by the closed door behind us, giving us privacy and quiet for the first time all night. The party noise was muffled, distant laughter and music creating a comfortable backdrop, and she finally dropped the act, her shoulders relaxing as she leaned against the railing, the performance over, and something more real taking its place. So that was probably the stupidest way anyone's ever flirted, she said, pulling off her red wig and running her fingers through her real hair, darker and slightly messy from being under the wig all night, somehow even more beautiful without the costume. But it worked. Did it? I asked, needing to hear it, needing the confirmation that this was real and not another elaborate joke I was misunderstanding. She turned to look at me directly, and there was no performance now, no act, just Sabrina being completely honest, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen her before. Because I've been trying for 2 months. I asked you to help me carry a single textbook. One textbook. It weighed like 2 pounds. The revelation hit me like a truck, recontextualizing every interaction we'd ever had, making me see everything differently, every moment I'd dismissed as friendship suddenly glowing with new meaning. I thought you were just... And I kept mentioning how strong you looked after the gym, and how good you looked in that tank top at the car wash fundraiser. Each example was another piece of evidence I'd completely missed, obvious in retrospect, embarrassingly obvious. I thought you were being nice, I protested, defending my obliviousness, though even I could hear how weak the defense sounded now. I'm not that nice. She moved closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume mixed with the cool night air, close enough that I could see the way the porch light caught in her eyes. I literally asked you to study with me every single day, even though I have a better grade than you in chemistry. We were quiet for a moment, just looking at each other, and the silence felt full of everything we'd been too scared to say, all the possibilities we'd been dancing around for months. She was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, vulnerable and open and terrifying in its honesty, like she was handing me something precious and hoping I wouldn't drop it. I'm actually scared, though, she said finally, her voice quieter now, almost a whisper. Of biceps? I joked, unable to help myself, trying to lighten the moment because the weight of it was almost too much. No, you idiot. Of messing this up. You're like my favorite person to talk to. What if we try this, and it ruins everything? The fear in her voice mirrored my own, all those late-night anxieties I'd never voiced, the terror of losing something good by wanting more. What if it doesn't? She took my hand, her fingers warm against mine, and the simple gesture felt momentous, Felt like crossing a threshold we couldn't uncross. That's scary, too. Good thing we're being brave tonight, I said, squeezing her hand gently, feeling her squeeze back. So we're really doing this? She asked, and I could hear hope and fear fighting in her voice, could feel the weight of the question. I mean, we're already in coordinating Marvel costumes. She laughed, that same laugh I'd been falling for in chemistry class, and it sounded even better now. Okay, we're dating then. Update. We stood there on the porch for another minute, our hands still linked together, both smiling like complete idiots who'd just figured out something everyone else already knew. The party noise drifted through the closed door behind us, muffled bass and distant laughter creating a bubble of privacy that neither of us wanted to break. She looked down at our joined hands, then back up at me, and I watched her take a breath like she was about to say something important. We should probably go back inside, she said, squeezing my fingers gently. Tell people we're actually together now. I nodded, agreeing completely, but my feet didn't move, and neither did hers. Going back inside meant this private moment ended, meant reality started, meant dealing with questions and reactions, and the weight of making this thing between us real in front of everyone we knew. The cool October air wrapped around us, and I could smell her perfume mixed with the scent of fallen leaves. And for just a few more seconds I wanted to stay in this perfect bubble, where it was just us, and our stupid bicep jokes, and the knowledge that she'd been trying for 2 months, while I'd been completely blind. She smiled at my hesitation, understanding it completely, and we stood there in comfortable silence for another 30 seconds, before she finally tugged my hand toward the door. When we walked back inside, the warmth and noise hit us immediately, a wall of sound and heat after the quiet coolness of the porch. Nathan spotted us within seconds, his eyes going straight to our joined hands, and his face broke into the biggest smile I'd ever seen on him. He didn't say anything, didn't shout or make a scene, just raised his hand and gave me a thumbs up from across the room where he stood near the kitchen. I could see the knowing look in his eyes, the "I told you so" already forming, and I knew he was going to give me so much crap about this later in the best possible way. Sabrina saw him too, and waved, laughing at his obvious approval, and I felt this weird sense of everything clicking into place, like pieces of my life that had been scattered were suddenly forming a picture that made sense. We barely made it 5 steps into the room before Sabrina's friends appeared out of nowhere, materializing like they'd been watching the porch door the whole time. 3 girls rushed over, their faces lighting up with excitement and curiosity, talking over each other as they surrounded us. "What happened?" one asked, looking between us and our still joined hands. "Did you finally tell him?" Another added, bouncing on her toes. Sabrina's smile got even bigger somehow, and she looked at me for just a second before turning back to her friends. "We're dating now," she announced, and the squeal that came from all 3 of them at once probably damaged my hearing permanently. They swarmed her, hugging and jumping and making excited noises that drew attention from nearby partygoers. I stood there awkwardly, still holding Sabrina's hand, but suddenly feeling very outside this circle of female excitement, not sure what to do with myself while they celebrated. Then one of them, the tall one with dark hair I recognized from chemistry class, turned and hugged me too, pulling me into the celebration. "Welcome to the group," she said, grinning at me like I'd just passed some kind of test. "We've been waiting for this since September." The other 2 nodded enthusiastically, and I realized they'd all been in on it, had probably heard every detail of Sabrina's attempts to get me to notice her, had probably discussed my obliviousness in great detail. The rest of the party felt completely different after that, like someone had adjusted the lighting and turned up the color saturation on everything. We moved through the crowded rooms together, not in an obvious couple way that would annoy everyone, just naturally staying close, gravitating toward each other without thinking about it. Our hands found each other's when we stood talking to different groups, fingers intertwining automatically. When someone handed me a drink, she was right there beside me. When she laughed at someone's costume, I could feel the sound resonating through me because we were standing that close. I wasn't anxiously scanning rooms anymore, wasn't searching for red hair in every crowd, wasn't worried about where she was or if she was having fun without me. She was right here, her shoulder brushing against mine, her hand warm in my grip, and the relief of not searching anymore mixed with the excitement of actually having what I'd wanted for months. Around midnight, we ended up on a worn couch in the corner of the living room, sinking into cushions that had seen better days. A group nearby played some drinking game that involved a lot of shouting and laughter, cards scattered across a coffee table, but we weren't paying much attention to them. She leaned against me, fitting naturally into the space between my arm and my side, and I put my arm around her shoulders without thinking about it. The gesture felt so natural, so easy, like we'd been doing this for years instead of minutes. I couldn't believe I'd been scared of this moment just hours ago, Couldn't believe I'd spent so long overthinking every possible interaction when this simple act of sitting together felt like the most natural thing in the world. Her head rested against my shoulder, and I could feel her breathing, steady and calm, and the party noise faded into background static. Nathan appeared out of the crowd, dropping into a chair across from us with a knowing smirk that told me the teasing was about to begin. He leaned back, looking between us with obvious amusement, and I braced myself for whatever was coming. "So," he said, drawing out the word, "how are you two doing?" Before I could answer, Sabrina launched into the most dramatic retelling of her 2 months of suffering that I'd ever heard. She sat up straighter, using her hands for emphasis, her voice taking on this theatrical quality that had people nearby turning to listen. She described every hint she'd dropped, every attempt to get me to notice, painting herself as a tragic heroine fighting against impossible odds in the form of my complete obliviousness. I was laughing, but also cringing, hearing all these moments I'd completely misread laid out in sequence, each one more obvious than the last in retrospect. Nathan was eating it up, nodding along like he'd heard parts of this story before, adding his own commentary about how dense I'd been. The way she told it made it funny instead of embarrassing, made my obliviousness seem charming instead of stupid, and I was grateful for that, even as I wanted to hide my face. "And the textbook," she said, building to what was clearly her favorite example. I asked him to carry a single textbook. One textbook. It weighed like 2 pounds. Nathan lost it, laughing so hard he had to wipe his eyes, and when he could breathe again, he looked at me with disbelief. She told me about that at the time. He managed between laughs. "I called you an idiot then." Apparently he'd been hearing about my failures in real time, had been watching this whole thing unfold from both sides, knowing what I didn't know. "I thought she was just being nice," I said weakly, trying to defend myself even though I knew it was hopeless. Everyone within earshot laughed harder, and Sabrina patted my arm like she was comforting a child who'd just learned the sky was blue. We left the party together around 1 in the morning, stepping out into the cool night air that felt good after hours in the crowded, warm house. The campus stretched out before us, mostly dark except for scattered streetlights and the lit windows of dorms where people were still awake. There was this moment of uncertainty, this pause where neither of us knew what happened next. She lived in the dorms across campus from mine, a good 15-minute walk in opposite directions, and we were both clearly not ready to say goodnight yet, not ready to end this night that had changed everything. So we just started walking, slowly, in no particular direction, our hands still linked together. Our feet took us down familiar paths, past the library that would be closed for hours, past academic buildings dark and silent. We walked without talking much, just being together, and it felt right in a way that made me not care where we were going or how long it took to get there. The campus fountain came into view, lit up by underwater lights that made the water glow blue and white, and without discussing it, we both headed that way. We sat on the wide stone edge, close enough that our legs touched, and the sound of flowing water filled the comfortable silence. The fountain was pretty despite the late hour, peaceful in a way the party hadn't been, and I felt like I could actually think clearly for the first time all night. "I noticed you on the first day of chemistry class," she said, looking at the water instead of at me. "You made a joke about the periodic table during introductions that actually made me laugh." I tried to remember what I'd said, came up blank, had no memory of being funny on the first day when I'd been too nervous about college classes to think straight. "I don't even remember what I said," I admitted, which made her smile. "Something about how you hoped chemistry would be more stable than your last relationship," she said. "It was terrible, but you committed to it, and I thought that was cute." I felt my face get hot, embarrassed and pleased at the same time. "I thought you were completely out of my league," I said, the truth coming out easier in the darkness, with the fountain noise covering any awkwardness. I tried to just be a good lab partner without making things weird. She turned to look at me then, and in the blue-white glow of the fountain lights I could see her expression clearly. She looked at me like I was crazy, like I'd just said something completely absurd. "Out of your league?" she repeated. "I was worried you weren't interested because you never picked up on any of my hints." I thought I was being incredibly obvious. The gap between how we'd each seen the situation was almost funny, both of us worried about the same thing from different angles, both of us too scared to just say what we wanted. She started telling me about her family back in Oregon, her mom who teaches elementary school, and her dad who works in software, her younger brother who just started high school and wants to be a veterinarian, painting this picture of a normal, happy family that made me feel comfortable sharing about mine. I told her about growing up in Texas with my parents, who both work in healthcare, my older sister who's already graduated and working as an accountant, the family dog we've had since I was 12. We talked about our majors, and I learned she's pre-med, which explained why she took chemistry so seriously, why she always studied harder than everyone else in class, why she got stressed about every test and quiz. She told me organic chemistry next semester scared her more than anything, that she'd heard horror stories from other pre-med students about how hard it was, how many people failed or dropped out of the major because of that one class. I offered to help her study since I actually enjoyed chemistry and found it easier than most people did, and she smiled at me like I'd just offered her something incredibly valuable, like I'd taken away some of the weight she'd been carrying. She asked about my plans after college, and I admitted I wasn't totally sure yet, maybe graduate school for chemistry, or maybe getting a job in a lab somewhere, still figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. She didn't judge me for not having it all planned out, just nodded and said she thought it was smart to keep options open, that too many people rushed into decisions they regretted later. We kept talking about everything we'd somehow never covered despite sitting next to each other for 2 months, discovering we both liked the same terrible reality TV shows, that we'd both been to Colorado on family vacations, that we both thought the dining hall pizza was disgusting, but ate it anyway. The fountain water kept flowing behind us, and the campus stayed quiet around us, and time felt like it stopped mattering, like we could sit here forever just learning about each other. Then headlights swept across us, and a campus security car pulled up slowly, the window rolling down to reveal an older officer with a tired but friendly face. He told us it was almost 2 in the morning, and we should probably head back to our dorms, that the campus wasn't technically closed, but it was safer to be inside this late. We both checked our phones and couldn't believe how much time had passed, how we'd been sitting at this fountain talking for over 2 hours without noticing. I stood up and offered her my hand to help her up, and when she took it, I pulled her to her feet, and we both thanked the security officer. He drove away slowly, and we started walking toward the dorms, neither of us ready to split up yet, but knowing we had to eventually. She pulled out her phone and asked for my number, even though we already had each other's numbers saved from the first week of class, when our lab professor made everyone exchange contact information. I understood what she meant, though, that this was different, that we were making it official for dating purposes, instead of just lab partner purposes. I typed my number into her phone while she typed hers into mine, both of us grinning at the silly formality of it, and then she immediately sent me a text, with just a heart emoji, so I'd have her new message at the top of my texts. We walked past the science building where we had chemistry class, past the student center that would be crowded tomorrow, past all these familiar places that felt different now, like the whole campus had shifted somehow. Her dorm appeared ahead of us, and we both slowed down, drawing out these last few minutes together, and when we reached the front entrance, we stopped and faced each other. She looked up at me, and I looked down at her, and there was this moment of uncertainty about what happened next, if we were supposed to hug or just say goodnight or what. Then she went up on her toes and kissed me, just a quick, soft kiss that lasted maybe 3 seconds, but somehow felt more important than the whole dramatic party scene, more real than all the bicep jokes and fake fainting. Her lips were warm, and she tasted like the mint gum she'd been chewing earlier, and when she pulled back, she was smiling. She told me goodnight and slipped inside her dorm before I could say anything back, and I stood there on the sidewalk like an idiot, just staring at the door she'd disappeared through. I started walking back to my own dorm on the other side of campus, and couldn't stop smiling, couldn't stop touching my lips where she'd kissed me, couldn't stop replaying that moment over and over. My roommate was already asleep when I got back to my room, and I tried to be quiet getting ready for bed, but I kept grinning like an absolute idiot, kept checking my phone to see if she'd texted, even though we'd just said goodbye 5 minutes ago. I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning, still thinking about her, about how tonight had turned out better than I'd ever imagined when I was standing in my room earlier, trying on different costumes. My phone buzzing woke me up way too early, and I grabbed it off my nightstand with my eyes still mostly closed, squinting at the bright screen in my dark room. The text from her showed a photo of her flexing both arms in what looked like her bathroom mirror, still in pajamas with messy hair, and the caption read, "Recovered from my phobia thanks to exposure therapy." I started laughing out loud in bed at 8 in the morning on a Sunday, and my roommate groaned and threw his pillow at me, telling me to shut up, but I couldn't stop laughing. I texted back asking if she needed a follow-up treatment session, and she responded immediately saying breakfast at the dining hall in an hour, and suddenly I was wide awake and panicking about what to wear. My roommate asked what was so funny, and I told him about last night, about the party, and the bicep jokes and how we were dating now, and he just shook his head and went back to sleep saying he was happy for me, but I needed to let him sleep. I pulled out practically every shirt I owned for the second time in 12 hours, holding them up, and trying to figure out what looked good, but not like I was trying too hard, casual but not sloppy, showing I cared without being obvious about it. My phone buzzed again, and it was a text from Nathan asking how last night went, and I sent him a long message while I got dressed, telling him everything from the party to the fountain to the goodnight kiss. He responded with approximately 15 exclamation points and said he knew it would work out, that he'd been telling me for weeks she was into me. I finally settled on jeans and a regular shirt, nothing fancy, and headed to the dining hall trying not to walk too fast, even though I wanted to run there. She was already waiting outside when I arrived, wearing leggings and an oversized sweatshirt with her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking comfortable and pretty, and making me glad I hadn't overdressed. We walked in together and grabbed trays and started going through the food line, and she immediately made fun of my coffee order when I added what she called an insane amount of sugar and cream. I defended myself saying I liked my coffee to actually taste good, and she laughed and said I was basically drinking candy, then got herself a bowl of yogurt and fruit that I mocked as boring health food. We found a table by the windows where morning sun was streaming in and sat across from each other, and it felt different from all the times we'd studied together in the library or worked on lab reports. We were both clearly aware this was our first real date, even if it was just dining hall breakfast, both a little nervous, but also comfortable because we already knew each other so well from class. She asked about my roommate, and I told her he was probably still asleep and annoyed with me for laughing so loud this morning, and she grinned and said she'd been trying to be quiet taking that photo, but her roommate had woken up and asked what she was doing. After breakfast, we walked around campus together since it was actually a nice fall day, sunny but cool with leaves crunching under our feet, most other students still asleep or staying inside. We ended up at the library without planning it, and she led me up to the 4th floor where she said she had a favorite study spot, a table by these huge windows that looked out over the quad. She told me I was allowed to study there with her now that we were dating, saying it like she was granting me access to some exclusive club, and I felt stupidly honored by the invitation. We stayed there for a while just talking and watching other students slowly start appearing on campus as the morning went on, and everything felt easy and natural and right. Monday morning came too fast, and I met her outside the chemistry building before class like we'd been doing all semester, but this time when she saw me, she walked right up and kissed me quickly before anyone else arrived. My face went red immediately, and she laughed at my reaction, clearly enjoying making me blush in public, and then other students started showing up, so we went inside. Our lab professor definitely noticed the kiss, because she looked at us with this knowing smile when we sat down at our usual table, and throughout the whole class I kept catching her glancing over at us with an amused expression. The lab work felt different somehow, even though we were doing the same kind of experiments we'd done all semester, like everything had shifted into a new phase, and I couldn't quite believe this was actually happening. That whole week, we fell into a new routine of eating meals together at the dining hall, studying together at her spot in the library, texting constantly whenever we were apart in our separate classes. My grades actually started improving because she was really good at keeping me focused on studying, turning it into this competition where we'd quiz each other and try to stump each other with hard questions. She'd text me chemistry problems randomly throughout the day, and I'd have to solve them before she'd tell me good morning or good night, and somehow it made studying feel less boring. Wednesday came, and Nathan met up with us for lunch, dropping into the seat across from us with a huge grin that told me he was about to embarrass me. He immediately launched into stories about me from freshman year, telling her about the time I'd gotten locked out of my dorm room in just a towel, about when I'd accidentally gone to the wrong classroom and sat through half a lecture before realizing about every stupid thing I'd done in the past 2 years. She was laughing at every story and asking for more details, and I was trying to shut him up, but also kind of enjoying watching them get along so well, realizing she was fitting into my life perfectly, already joking with my best friend like they'd known each other forever. Friday came faster than I expected, and suddenly I was standing in my room again, staring at my closet, trying to figure out what to wear for our first actual date at a real restaurant off campus. I pulled out a button-down shirt and dress pants, and even found a tie in the back of my closet from some formal event freshman year, and spent 20 minutes in front of the mirror trying to get the knot right. My roommate walked in and asked if I was going to a funeral, and I told him it was my first real date with her, and he just shook his head and said I was overthinking it again, but I kept the tie on anyway. I showed up at her dorm 15 minutes early and waited outside checking my phone every 30 seconds until she finally came out wearing jeans and an oversized sweater with her hair down, and she looked absolutely perfect, while I looked like I was interviewing for a job. She took one look at me and started laughing, and I felt my face turn red, but then she reached up and loosened my tie a little and said I looked cute when I was trying too hard, and somehow that made everything better. We walked to the restaurant a few blocks off campus, and I kept adjusting my tie nervously, and she kept glancing over at me with this smile that made me less worried about being overdressed. The restaurant was this Italian place that Nathan had recommended, and we got a table by the window, and I finally relaxed a little once we sat down and started looking at menus. She ordered pasta, and I got pizza, and we both laughed about how we were basically still eating college food just in a nicer setting, and the conversation flowed easily like it always did between us. We started talking about how weird it was that we'd spent 2 whole months sitting next to each other in chemistry lab before this, and she admitted she'd been dropping hints the entire time hoping I'd notice. She told me she'd almost given up completely, and was planning to just directly ask me out after Halloween if the costume thing didn't work. And I couldn't believe she'd been that close to making the first move while I was busy being completely blind to everything. I asked her why she didn't just tell me sooner, and she said she kept hoping I'd figure it out on my own, because she wanted to know if I was actually interested or just being nice, and that made sense even though it meant we'd wasted 2 months. The waiter brought our food, and we kept talking between bites about all the moments I'd missed, and every story made me feel more like an idiot, but also more grateful that she'd been patient enough to keep trying. After dinner, we walked back toward campus slowly, because neither of us wanted the night to end yet, and the November air was cold enough that I could see our breath, but not so cold that it was uncomfortable. She reached over and took my hand without saying anything, and we walked for a while just holding hands and not talking, and it felt natural and right, and like something we should have been doing for months already. Then she asked me what I wanted from this relationship, and the question caught me off guard, because I hadn't really thought that far ahead, beyond just being happy we were finally together. I told her I wanted to take things at our own pace and not rush anything, and she nodded and said she wanted the same thing, and that we should just see where this goes without putting too much pressure on it. We agreed we were both excited, but also wanted to be smart about it, and not mess up something good by moving too fast, and I felt relieved that we were on the same page about everything. The following week, I went to her dorm to pick her up for studying, and her roommate answered the door with this huge grin and immediately told me she'd been hearing about me since September. Her roommate invited me in while she waited for her to finish getting ready, and then pulled out her phone, and showed me a group chat between her and her friends where they'd been analyzing every single interaction we had in lab, trying to figure out if I liked her back. I read through messages where she'd described me carrying her textbook and asking if that meant anything, and her friends telling her to just ask me out already, and I felt both flattered that she'd been thinking about me that much, and embarrassed that I'd given her so much reason to doubt. Her roommate was laughing at my reaction and said they'd all been rooting for us, and were so relieved when Halloween finally worked, and then she came out of her room ready to go and saw us looking at the phone and turned bright red. A few days later, I completely forgot we'd planned to study together because Nathan texted asking if I wanted to play basketball, and I said yes, without checking my calendar first. I was halfway to the gym when I got a text from her asking if I was coming, and my stomach dropped when I realized what I'd done, and I felt terrible for forgetting something we'd specifically planned. She texted back that it was fine, but I could tell from the way she wrote it that she was disappointed and not actually fine, and I immediately turned around and told Nathan I had to bail. I stopped at the coffee shop and got her usual order and showed up at her dorm 20 minutes later with apology coffee and a genuine sorry, and she opened the door looking surprised that I'd come. She let me in, and I apologized again for being an idiot and forgetting, and she took the coffee and said she appreciated me coming, but I didn't have to drop everything for her just because I messed up. We sat down, and she explained that having our own lives and friends were healthy and important, and she didn't want me to feel like I had to choose between her and Nathan, or feel guilty every time I had other plans. I told her I wanted to make it up to her, and she said the best way to do that was just to check my calendar before making plans, and communicate better, and I was impressed by how mature and reasonable she was being about the whole thing. Halloween became our thing after that, and we joked about it constantly to the point where it was almost annoying to everyone else, but we didn't care. Whenever someone in lab asked how we got together, she would launch into the bicep phobia story with increasing dramatic flair, and I would play along by flexing at completely inappropriate moments during class. Our lab professor finally asked us to tone it down after I flexed in the middle of her lecture about chemical bonds, and everyone started laughing, and she was trying not to smile, but also clearly wanted us to focus. 3 weeks into dating, she asked if I wanted to meet her parents over video call since they lived in Oregon and couldn't visit, and I said yes, even though the idea made me nervous. We set up her laptop in her dorm room on a Sunday afternoon, and when her parents appeared on screen, they both looked friendly and curious, and her dad immediately made a joke about the bicep phobia story that she'd apparently already told them about. Her mom asked about my major and my family, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, and her dad kept making terrible chemistry puns that were somehow even worse than mine, and I could see where she got her sense of humor from. The call lasted almost an hour, and by the end, I felt like I'd passed some kind of test I hadn't known I was taking, and her parents told me I was welcome to visit during winter break if I wanted. The following weekend, my parents came to campus for Parents' Weekend, and I introduced them to her at lunch, and my mom loved her instantly asking about her pre-med plans and her family. My dad was quieter, but I could tell he approved by the way he asked detailed questions about organic chemistry and what medical schools she was considering, and actually listened to her answers. We all had dinner together that night, and my parents kept exchanging these looks like they were communicating silently about how much they liked her, and when they left the next day, my mom hugged her goodbye and told her to take care of me. Early November brought midterms and the stress of studying for multiple tests in the same week, and I could tell she was getting anxious by the way she kept checking her notes obsessively. I tried to help by quizzing her on concepts, but she snapped at me that I was doing it wrong and making her more confused, and I backed off feeling hurt and confused about what I'd done wrong. An hour later, she texted me apologizing and explaining that she gets really anxious about tests, and sometimes takes it out on people around her, even when they're trying to help. We met up and talked about better ways to support each other during stressful times, and she said sometimes she just needs space to study alone, and I said I could give her that, and we'd figure out what works as we went along. The next week, I started showing up at the campus gym more regularly, pushing through the doors at 6 in the morning when most students were still asleep, the fluorescent lights harsh after the darkness outside. I'd been going a few times a week before, but now I went almost every day, partly because she'd mentioned liking that I worked out, and partly because I actually enjoyed having this routine with her, even when she wasn't there. The weight room was usually empty that early, just me and a few other dedicated people moving through our exercises in comfortable silence, the clanking of weights and hum of treadmills, the only sounds. She noticed the change immediately, texting me one morning asking if I was trying to develop actual weapons of mass destruction, referencing our Halloween joke with a string of laughing emojis that made me grin at my phone between sets. I sent back a photo of my arm mid-curl with the caption "exposure therapy in progress," and she responded saying she might need another session soon. Maybe she could come with me sometime. So she started joining me twice a week, showing up in workout clothes with her hair pulled back, looking determined and slightly intimidating as she loaded weights onto the bar. She was stronger than I expected, lifting with proper form that made it clear she knew what she was doing, and I found myself impressed and maybe slightly threatened by how much she could bench press. We'd work out mostly in silence, focused on our own routines, but every so often she'd catch me looking and flex dramatically, asking if I was scared yet, keeping the bicep joke alive in a way that made the other gym people stare at us confused. After workouts, we'd grab breakfast together at the dining hall, both of us sweaty and tired but energized, talking about our classes and upcoming assignments while we ate. The routine became something I looked forward to more than the actual exercise, this shared activity that was just ours, another way we fit into each other's lives naturally. Then November hit its midpoint, and suddenly Thanksgiving break was approaching, looming like this unavoidable separation that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. She was flying home to Oregon for the week, and I was driving back to Texas, opposite directions that meant we wouldn't see each other for 7 whole days. 7 days felt impossibly long when we'd been seeing each other every single day for weeks, when I'd gotten used to her presence being a constant part of my routine. The night before she left, we sat in her dorm room supposedly studying for exams but mostly just talking, both of us avoiding the topic of the upcoming separation, until finally she brought it up. She said she was going to miss me, said it casually like it wasn't a big deal, but I could hear the actual feeling behind the words. I told her I'd miss her too, which felt like a massive understatement for the weird anxiety building in my chest at the thought of not seeing her for a week. We promised to text constantly and video call every night, making plans like we were preparing for some major expedition instead of just going home to our families for a holiday. The first day of break, I drove the 6 hours back to Texas, my car loaded with dirty laundry and textbooks I probably wouldn't open, my phone buzzing constantly with texts from her about her flight and her parents picking her up from the airport. That night, we video called for 2 hours, both of us in our childhood bedrooms that felt weird and unfamiliar after months of dorm life, talking about nothing important, but not wanting to hang up. My mom knocked on my door asking who I was talking to, and I introduced her to Sabrina through the screen, watching my mom's face light up with interest and barely contained questions. The whole week went like that, constant texting throughout the day and long video calls every night, staying connected even though we were thousands of miles apart. I helped my dad with yard work and caught up with high school friends who were also home for break. But the whole time, part of my brain was focused on when I could talk to her next, checking my phone more than I ever had before. She sent me photos of her family's Thanksgiving dinner, her mom's elaborate spread, and her dad making faces in the background. her younger brother looking annoyed at being in family photos. I sent her pictures of my family's chaos, my sister's terrible cooking attempt, and my dad's football commentary, trying to share pieces of my life that she hadn't seen yet. By day 3, I realized I'd never missed anyone this much before. Never felt this constant pull toward another person, never checked my phone this obsessively waiting for texts. By day 5, I was counting down the hours until I'd see her again, doing the math on when I'd get back to campus, and when her flight landed, planning our reunion like it was some major event. When we finally got back to campus the following Sunday, I drove straight to the airport parking lot where she'd told me to meet her, my stomach doing weird flips the whole drive there. I saw her before she saw me, pulling her suitcase across the parking lot, scanning the cars looking for mine, and something in my chest just settled seeing her again. I got out of my car, and she spotted me immediately, her face breaking into this huge smile that made the whole week of missing her worth it. She dropped her suitcase handle and basically ran the last few steps, throwing her arms around me in a hug that knocked me back slightly, her face pressed against my chest. She said she missed me so much, her voice muffled against my shirt, and I held her tight, breathing in her familiar perfume mixed with airplane smell, feeling complete in a way I hadn't felt all week. We stood there in the parking lot hugging for probably too long, other people walking past with their luggage, neither of us caring about the scene we were making. When we finally pulled apart, she looked up at me, and I knew right then that I was falling for her hard. Maybe had already fallen completely, maybe had been falling since that first day in chemistry class and just hadn't admitted it to myself. I helped her load her suitcase into my car and drove her back to her dorm, our hands linked across the center console the whole way, both of us talking over each other, trying to share everything from the week that texts and video calls hadn't captured. December arrived with its usual stress, and suddenly finals were 2 weeks away, and everyone on campus shifted into panic mode. The library became impossibly crowded, every table and study room claimed by desperate students surrounded by textbooks and coffee cups, the stress almost visible in the air. But studying with her made it bearable, made it almost enjoyable in a weird way, turning what should have been miserable into something we did together. We'd meet at her favorite spot on the 4th floor, spreading our materials across the table, her chemistry notes and my calculus problems mixing together in organized chaos. She'd quiz me on molecular structures, and I'd walk her through derivative problems, both of us taking turns being the teacher and the student, finding ways to make the material stick. Every hour we'd take a break, walking down to the campus coffee shop to get refills and complain about our professors, joining the long line of other stressed students doing the same thing. She'd vent about her organic chemistry professor, who assigned impossible amounts of reading, and I'd complain about my calculus teacher, who seemed to enjoy making problems unnecessarily complicated. These breaks became as important as the studying, these moments to decompress and remember that finals weren't actually life or death, even though they felt like it. Some nights we'd study until the library closed at midnight, the staff having to kick us out along with all the other students who'd lost track of time. We'd walk back to the dorms together, both of us exhausted but somehow energized by having spent the time together, making plans for the next day's study session. The last day of fall semester finally arrived, my final exam finishing at 3 in the afternoon, my brain completely fried from 2 weeks of constant studying and test-taking. I texted her asking if she was done yet, and she responded that she'd finished her last exam an hour ago and was waiting for me at the fountain. I walked across campus in the December cold, my breath visible in the air, students everywhere celebrating being done or commiserating about exams they thought they'd failed. The fountain was still running despite the cold, the water lit up by those same blue and white lights that had been there on Halloween night, and she was sitting on the edge right where we'd sat that first night. I sat down next to her, and she immediately leaned against me, both of us just sitting there in comfortable silence for a minute, watching the water and processing that the semester was actually over. She said this had been the best semester of college so far, said it quietly, like she was almost surprised by the realization, and I agreed completely, knowing she was the entire reason why. We talked about our exams and our plans for winter break, making the conversation light and easy, even though I was already dreading another separation. She mentioned her parents had invited me to visit during break, said they wanted to meet me properly after all the video calls, and I felt this weird mix of excitement and nerves at the prospect of meeting them in person. I told her my parents had said she was welcome any time, that my mom had basically demanded I bring her home at some point, and she smiled and said she'd love to visit. The conversation shifted to logistics, comparing our break schedules and finding weekends that would work, planning these visits like they were the most important events of our lives. Sitting there at the fountain making plans together, I realized this was getting serious in the best possible way, that we'd moved past the tentative early stages into something real and lasting. Before we left campus for winter break, she invited me to her dorm room saying she had something for me, her tone suggesting this was important. I showed up at her door and she let me in, her roommate conveniently gone, the room decorated with small Christmas lights she'd strung up around her desk. She pulled out a small wrapped box from her desk drawer, handing it to me with this shy smile that was different from her usual confident expression. I opened it carefully, and inside was a Captain America shield keychain, the metal detailed and perfect, clearly chosen as a callback to our Halloween costumes and the night that started everything. I started laughing because it was so perfectly us, so perfectly her sense of humor, and she looked relieved that I got the joke. I pulled out the gift I'd gotten her from my backpack, a small box I'd been carrying around waiting for the right moment, and handed it to her, feeling suddenly nervous about whether she'd like it. She opened it to find a silver necklace with a small charm in the shape of a molecule, the chemical structure for dopamine, because that's what I'd told her she gave me, a rush every time I saw her. Her eyes went wide, and she looked at me like I'd just given her something incredibly precious, saying it was perfect, saying she loved it, saying she couldn't believe I'd thought of something so meaningful. She put it on immediately, the small charm sitting right below her collarbone, and I felt proud that I'd managed to get her something that meant something, instead of just being generic. We spent the next hour just talking in her room, both of us avoiding saying goodbye, both of us knowing we had to leave soon, but not wanting to be the first one to end this moment. Winter break started with me driving 4 hours to visit her, my car loaded with overnight stuff, and the address her parents had sent me programmed into my GPS. I'd never been this nervous about meeting someone's parents before, changing my shirt 3 times that morning and checking my hair in the mirror obsessively. Her house was in a nice suburban neighborhood, the kind of place with actual yards and driveways, so different from campus dorms and apartments. She opened the door before I could knock, clearly watching from my car, and hugged me like we'd been apart for months instead of 3 days. Her parents appeared behind her, both smiling and welcoming, and I shook her dad's hand, trying not to squeeze too hard or too soft, trying to be impressive without trying too hard to be impressive. Her mom hugged me immediately, which surprised me, but felt nice, and within 5 minutes they had me sitting at their kitchen table with food and drinks, asking about school and my family, and making me feel comfortable. Her dad launched into the first bicep joke about 10 minutes in, asking if I'd registered my arms as deadly weapons yet, and her mom rolled her eyes but was smiling, clearly used to his humor. The whole weekend was like that, her dad making approximately 50 variations of the bicep joke, each one somehow funnier than the last because of how committed he was to the bit. I could see exactly where she got her personality from, her dad's terrible sense of humor and her mom's warmth and directness, the combination creating this family dynamic that felt easy and welcoming. We spent the weekend doing normal family stuff, watching movies and playing board games and eating too much food, and they treated me like I'd always been part of their lives, instead of some new person they were evaluating. The following weekend, she drove to visit me, making the trip in the opposite direction, and I stressed about my family making a good impression the same way I had about meeting hers. My parents had cleaned the house more thoroughly than they had in months, and my sister kept asking questions about her, clearly excited to meet the girl I'd been talking about constantly. When she arrived, my mom hugged her immediately, just like her mom had hugged me, and my dad shook her hand formally before relaxing into his normal friendly self. My sister suggested we go ice skating at the outdoor rink downtown, something we did every year during break, and she agreed enthusiastically, even though she admitted she'd never actually ice skated before. At the rink, I watched her wobble onto the ice, gripping the wall like her life depended on it, her legs going in different directions as she tried to find her balance. She was terrible at it, completely unable to stay upright for more than a few seconds, but she was laughing the whole time, making jokes about her lack of coordination and not taking herself seriously at all. I skated next to her, helping her stay balanced, my sister on her other side doing the same, and I felt this overwhelming rush of feeling, watching her be completely bad at something, but enjoying it anyway. She fell probably 20 times that afternoon, each time laughing harder, never getting frustrated or embarrassed, just getting back up and trying again. I realized I loved that about her, how she could be confident and competent in so many areas, but also completely comfortable being terrible at something new, how she didn't need to be perfect at everything to enjoy herself. My parents invited her to stay for dinner, and we spent the evening around our dining table, her fitting into my family dynamic as easily as I'd fit into hers, everyone laughing, and talking over each other in the comfortable chaos of my family's usual dinner conversation. On New Year's Eve, we were back in our separate states, both of us at family parties, but at midnight, we video called like we'd planned. The countdown happened on both our screens simultaneously, our families celebrating in the background, but we were focused on each other through our phone screens. When midnight hit, she said she was so glad I finally figured out she liked me, her face close to the camera, and I could see the molecule necklace around her neck catching the light. I told her I was glad she was patient with the most oblivious guy in chemistry class, both of us laughing at the callback to all those missed signals and wasted time. We stayed on the call for another hour while our families partied around us, both of us sitting in quiet corners talking about the semester and our plans for when we got back to campus and what came next. I knew this was just the beginning of something really good, something that started with a ridiculous text about being scared of biceps and turned into the best relationship I could have asked for, something that felt right in every possible way.